Vlad von Carstein and the First Vampire Wars. In his former life, Vlad was not a cruel man, but the curse and the selfish pride that is usually brought about by vampirism has corrupted him in body, mind and soul. As with all vampires, the new Count of Sylvania was an ambitious man beyond mortal needs, and so he sought to instil his rule to not just Sylvania but the whole empire of man. At first, none of the feuding nobles of Sylvania paid any attention to the new count. If this bothered Vlad, he gave no sign of it. Vlad cherished his subjects in the same way a peasant family would cherish the beast that they are fattening up for the midsummer feast. After decades of harsh rule by the incompetent Count Otto, this new authority was welcomed by all save perhaps the most paranoid or perhaps the most knowing. On the eve of the year 2010, Vlad von Carstein thought the time right for his next step in his master plan. It was then, at the start of winter, that the Count called forth all his nobles of the province to pledge loyalty to him during a festival known as the Dance of the Dead. The dance was to be held at Drakenhof Castle. On the eve of the Dance of the Dead, at the height of the ball, he gave the order to his minions to close the entrance and kill every living thing inside. Only 2 people left the throne room alive. Alton Gans, loyal human servant of Vlad, which had suspected the true nature of his master plan, and Stefan Fischer, a witch hunter who had been chasing one of von Carstein's vampires for the murder of his wife, alongside another witch hunter, John Skellen, his brother-in-law. During this event, Skellen was killed and turned into a vampire, but Fischer managed to hide below a pile of dead corpses without being caught. With this deed enacted, the Count of Sylvania stood upon the battlements of Castle Drakenhof, and reading from one of the 9 books of Nagash, fueled by the magic-saturated warpstone recovered from Mordenheim, the necromancy spell flowed over the unguarded cemeteries of the Garden of Moor, and in an instant, all throughout the province, the dead began to stir. Slowly, every single cadaver in Sylvania began to move towards Drakenhof to answer the call of the vampire count. As the dead nobles started to emerge from the throne room, Stefan Fischer acted as a zombie and escaped Drakenhof with only a single thought in mind: they are coming. Fischer finally escaped the dead trap Sylvania had become, only to fall into the claws of a small band of vampires travelling through the empire. Accepting his fate, even feeling joy for soon being reunited with his wife, Fischer was content to finally meet his end, when suddenly he was saved by a small detachment of Countess Attila's army, sent to investigate the reports of the undead activity along the Sylvanian border. Fischer thus relayed the truth behind the vampire count's true nature. He stayed with Attila's army as they tried to fend off the undead at the Battle of Essen Ford, which would be the first conflict in the Vampire Wars. The Battle of Essen Ford was considered a total imperial massacre. Knee-deep in the mud and overwhelmed by impossible odds, the human army was easily swept aside. At the end of the battle, Fischer came across his brother-in-law, John Skellen. When the prisoners were lined up before the vampire count, Vlad showed them the extent of his power. While discussing with the leader of the army detachment, he invited first Gans, then 3 vampires, including Skellen, to choose a prisoner and kill them. Skellen chose Fischer and bled him dry, thus reuniting him with his dead wife. Vlad reanimated each of the dead Imperials, then asked the still living Imperial commander of the defeated army to choose one of his men to live. The latter refused, not wanting to decide about the life or death of his own. The vampire count chose the youngest of the prisoners and announced to him that he alone would live to spread the fear of the vampires throughout the empire. Then he freed the prisoner, who ran for his life. The war continued after the events of Ethenford for about 40 years. The dark shade of the Count put an aura of terror above the Empire. Countless times he was killed in battle, and each time he rose again to kill those who defeated him. At the Battle of Bloodhof, he fell impaled by 5 lances, with the Counts of Osterlen Runefang buried to the hilt in his heart, yet reappeared 3 days later. Overseeing the execution of the prisoners whilst at the town of Bogenhaven, he led his undead army to victory after being decapitated by a cannon only an hour before. When in the spring of 2050, the city of Mordenheim was attacked, and the Grand Master of the Knights of the White Wolf, Jerick Kruger, was turned into a vampire because he had dared to kill the Count at the Battle of Schwarzenhofen a year before. All hope seemed lost to the Imperials, and eventually the undead army now marched towards the last thing between them and victory, the Imperial capital of Altdorf. When the undead army arrived before the walls of Altdorf, they found the city was well prepared. With Reich had been diverted to surround the city. Harvest had been entered and the walls had been manned. However, the powers of Vlad proved enormous. In a shocking display of power, he covered the sky in clouds and awoke every dead beneath the plains surrounding Altdorf. Huge siege engines formed of zombies were thrown against the city walls, and in time the number of the dead soon outnumbered the number of the living. There was no hope of victory for mankind. In search of divine aid, the grand theologianist Wilhelm III retreated into the catacombs of the Cathedral of Altdorf to pray. It was in that holy place that he received a visit from Manfred von Carstein, the oldest thrall of Vlad. Manfred wanted the power of the vampire count for himself, but he knew that he wasn't strong enough to challenge Vlad in combat, so he informed Wilhelm III about the secret of the count's immortality. The priest then set about an elaborate trap to catch the best thief of the very age, Felix Mann. When they finally caught him robbing the imperial courthouse, they gave him a simple choice: to rob Vlad von Carstein's signet ring or to be hung for his crimes. In reward, the thief would be paid enough to start a living elsewhere. Felix accepted, and the thief, with little aid from Manfred von Carstein, robbed the Count of his most precious belonging. When the Count awoken, his anger was uncontrollable. In one attack, Vlad threw everything he had at Altdorf. There on the battlements, he confronted Wilhelm III and eventually overcame him. However, his last breath, the great theologianist, threw himself against the undead Count, and both fell from the walls. While the fall wouldn't have killed a vampire as powerful as Vlad, they both fell on a wooden stake. With the death of Vlad, his army dissolved.